Today we're going to be making resin lampshades, and we're using cheap paperboard to make the molds. In the video I'm using clear polyester casting resin that's not too expensive when purchased directly from fiberglass suppliers. So let's get started. Making a resin lampshade is quite an elaborate process, so plan well ahead even before making the actual mold. If you're going for a more complex form than, say, a cube, it is recommended to make a computerized 3D model of it. Save it as an STL file. Then export the STL file to another free software called Pepakura that unfolds your 3D model and presents it flat on a sheet of paper for you to print out and assemble. If you don't have a printer, simply measure all the edges of your 3D model and write the values on top of your unfolded Pepakura version. Now you have an idea how your model looks when flattened. Copy the values and shapes when drawing your mold outlines on paperboard and you're good to go. But before moving on to making the mold, I would make full-scale paper mock-ups of the design to be absolutely sure about the dimensions and form. This will give you a lot better idea of how the final product will occupy physical space than a virtual 3D model. With Pepakura 8, you can copy your mold outlines on paperboard, but remember to add extra height as you don't want the resin to overflow an additional flaps dough. Cut it out with sharp craft knife and thin the flaps. Your DIY releasing agent is humble sellotape, so sellotape all surfaces on the mold that come into contact with resin. For inner mold that you see in the video, sellotape outside surface after you have glued the mold together, and for the outer mold, sellotape the inside surface before you have glued the mold together. Add a flat sheet of paperboard to the bottom of your mold. Cover folds and joints generously with glue and duct tape, as you don't want it to start leaking after such a big work. In this case, clear polyester casting resin was used. If you use that, you need to mix the resin with hardener, which you need approximately 1% of the volume of the resin, and then pour it into the mold. With polyester resin, although, you need to cast in layers of 100 to 150 milliliters, leaving 35 to 45 minutes between each cast for allowing the last layer to gel a bit. This is because at too large volumes, the reaction between the resin and hardener becomes too vigorous, causing heat buildup and possibly cracking your resin model. In extreme cases, it might catch fire. So be careful with that. Cast as many layers to achieve the desired height, and then leave optimally for 24 hours to harden inside the mold. Beware of the smell, it is overwhelming, and casting should be done outdoors if possible. Depending on how careful you were while making the mold, you might need to repair some leaks in the process. Duct tape and crumbled toilet paper work. Bear in mind that resin acts as sort of adhesive itself, so if you manage to stop leaks, leave it to gel for a bit longer than usual, say for an hour, during which the hardened leaked resin will form a seal to the leak itself. Demolding such a complex model might feel daunting at first, but it's actually quite simple. Just patience and gentle persistence is needed. The outer mold is opened by tearing from the flaps. For detaching the inner mold, first the object needs to be securely fixed so it doesn't move when force is applied. Then take a chisel and gently make way between the resin and paperboard, and push the paperboard away from the resin. Work slowly as you don't want to be too forceful and break either the resin model or the mold, or both. Once you have separated most of the paperboard from resin, grab a pair of pliers and twist and pull the inner mold towards you. It should release relatively easily now. If you discovered after demolding that one of the walls of your resin object came out too thin or has a crack, you can fix it by gluing more resin onto it. In this case, the lampshade was simply laid on a thin facade, and a brush was sacrificed and used to apply fresh resin for thickening that particular wall. Depending on your personal preference, you might want to sand and polish the lampshade for extra smooth surfaces and to make it translucent instead of transparent for diffusing light and such. Again, industrial disc sander is great for first rough sanding and for straightening the walls, but it can be also done with electrical hand sander or simply by hand using rough grade sandpaper. For smoothing the surfaces, use finer grade sandpapers and do it by dipping the lampshade continuously into water. Sanding the inner surfaces is trickier. The sellotape on the mold leaves behind a peculiar pattern on the resin. If you can perceive it as a favorable side effect, you don't need to take any action, just leave it as it is. And you're done!